want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now.
He fought until the very end. That was my big brother.
John Lewis's legacy will be that he transformed America and made it a better place.
So to all of the young people, you must get out there and push and pull and make America what America should be.
I needed to come out and show how much we loved him and how much he'll be missed.
Generations from now, when parents teach their children what is meant by courage, the story of John Lewis will come to mind.
You too can help change our country. You can help change the world.
Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Aisha Howard. Tonight, we look back at the life and career of a civil rights icon, American hero, John Lewis. Since word of Lewis's death, the location of this mural on Auburn Avenue has really turned into a makeshift memorial to honor his legacy. Many have come to find comfort at his towering image. Some never met him, while others knew him well.
He was such a powerful man. And just hearing that he had passed, it was kind of devastating, but I was so happy that my kids got a chance to meet him. They kind of knew what he stood for. And like she said, because she is graduating and she is our future.
I had the rare privilege of watching one of the transformative figures of the 20th century help to change America. He bent the arc of history, and that's so rare that someone could give his life for a struggle. I believe that when history is written, it will record John Lewis with Mandela and King and Gandhi as one of the great transformative figures of the 20th century.
Congressman Lewis's legacy is one of inspiration and leadership, and it's that leadership that is needed more today than ever before. Hope Ford talked to two young leaders and activists willing to pick up the torch and continuing to make good trouble.
I can't breathe! I can't breathe!
Congressman Lewis once said Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. helped shape him. But from age 15 on, Lewis would use his actions and his words to inspire, influence, and guide others.
He's someone that, since I was a little girl, I just have always looked up to him.
Hannah Gebrselassie is one of many activists continuing to lead protests in Atlanta.
If it were not for them, I would not be here today. Many of us would not be here today. They fought so that we could exist.
And as the memorial grows below civil rights leaders of the past, current president of the Georgia NAACP, Reverend James Woodall, remembers celebrating the icon's 80th birthday in February.
Just simply waltzed around the room and he danced with a few people, and he just had nothing but joy on his face and love in his heart. And that's really the man he was. He just simply was a humble servant.
Lewis's pursuit of justice left a playbook for young leaders like 26-year-old Woodall.
To stand up, to speak out, and to show up and show out in ways that we knew to be necessary.
Lewis's death in this moment and during this movement is a mix of heartbreak and motivation.
We do mourn, but we also recommit to doing justice, to loving mercy, to walking humbly, and to doing it in a way that lifts up all people.
We know the words, and we know them well. And young justice advocates say they'll honor Lewis by continuing to make good trouble.
They brought us here, and now it's time for us to take it even further.
Thank you, Representative John Lewis. Thank you.
120 days ago, 5 Atlanta men, 5 legends of the American 20th century, warriors in the fight for civil and human rights, recipients of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, were with us. Now 3 are gone, 2 within the span of 12 hours. Ambassador Andrew Young and Hank Aaron remain. Atlanta without Congressman John Lewis, the Reverend C.T. Vivian, and Dr. Lowry, difficult to fathom. They cast giant shadows on so much here for so long. 4 decades ago, when I first arrived in Atlanta, a college friend from the Rocky Mountain West asked me, "Do you ever see any of these civil rights leaders in the community? Ever encounter any?" I responded, "Oh yeah, all the time. I see them in grocery stores, cafeterias, ball games, charity events. They're involved everything in Atlanta, large and small. I've met all of them." While many big cities are defined by architecture, bridges, skyscrapers, natural beauty, and location, Atlanta is unique. Our city has been known for its leadership, its moral leadership, men and women who changed not only this city, but the country and the world. In 2008, when Morris Brown College was on the brink of being shuttered, and the city of Atlanta had shut off the water. It was the Reverend C.T. Vivian who mobilized and helped raise $500,000 for the historic school founded by slaves, including getting the water turned back on. Today, Morris Brown College is prospering with new construction and a bustling enrollment. Reverend Vivian's workshops on race have trained thousands of Atlanta's leaders, both black and white, over the last 45 years. Dr. Joseph Lowry served Atlanta as the pastor of Cascade United Methodist Church from 1986 through 1992. The congregation is one of Atlanta's most influential churches. When my Atlanta colleagues would gather at work and restaurants and dinner parties or attend civic events, invariably the subject would come up. What does Atlanta look like without these great lions of the movement? Sadly, it means losing our soul. We should all be grateful for their navigation of the ship through difficult generational storms. Atlanta has survived and prospered. But what now? Where are we going? We are about to find out. Dr. King said, "Whatever your life's work is, do it well. A man should do his job so well that the living, the dead, and the unborn could do it no better."
When we come back, a special look back at a busy day in the life of the congressman on Capitol Hill.
Remembering John Lewis, proudly sponsored by Atlanta Life Insurance Company.
Introducing the new and improved 11alive.com. You spoke, we responded. Find stories fast with easier navigation and search. Get clearer weather forecasts in one click, all in a fresh new look. Visit the new 11alive.com now.
At Atlanta Life Insurance, we know it's important to meet your expectations. Our founder's vision started over a century ago and continues to grow, offering personal insurance, commercial insurance, and group reinsurance.
Eleven Alive produced an award-winning documentary hosted by Brenda Wood called Letters to Our Children. The show celebrated Congressman Lewis being awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama. Instead of reporters asking the questions, the honor went to their children. As you are about to see, Lewis's responses showed both his compassion, but also his hope in a future generation.
John Lewis, the dude is fierce. Fierce, courageous, and determined.
I saw this wonderful, innocent, saintly young man who was committed to changing the South without violence.
They were in a war, and they were the frontline soldiers in that war.
They were going in the battle to overcome evil with love, to overcome violence with nonviolence.
Literally stood on the front lines for freedom and created real change and helped the United States live up to its Constitution.
Some consider him fierce, courageous, and determined. Some consider him almost saintly. He is a giant in the civil rights movement, and yet some say he's an ordinary person doing extraordinary things. He was devoted to the cause of nonviolence. John Lewis has touched the lives of many people, and now my colleagues and I share his story in a very special way as we pen letters to our own children.
To my dynamic daughters, my heart bursts with pride at the young ladies you are today and the young women you will become.
It may be hard for you to believe, but things you do without a second thought were still taboo even 50 years ago.
I know we have spent many hours talking about the civil rights movement and its importance to African American history. I was a kid back in the 60s, and I watched the civil rights movement through the eyes of a child even younger than you are now.
The longevity of the freedoms afforded us are in direct proportion to our willingness not to give up, not to give out, and not to give in. That's the mantra by which Congressman John Lewis has lived.
One of the true trailblazers was instrumental in organizing student sit-ins with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. He also organized bus boycotts and several nonviolent protests with Dr. King.
He is the only person still living who spoke on the program on August 23, 1963, during the historic March on Washington, in which Dr. King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
He also led over 600 marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, which became known as Bloody Sunday because while praying, they were attacked in vehicles.
The freedoms our ancestors fought and died for cannot be wasted. So Candace, I urge you, don't forget the sacrifices made that got you where you are right now.
We can thank people like John Lewis for leaving the footsteps that the world can follow.
Just go and show my face so I won't be in trouble. How long ago did they call? Good to see you, brother. Hi. You know, you're not brand new.
The pace of his days on Capitol Hill.
In one evening, I went to like 7 receptions.
Gives no hint of his 70 years.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, you're going up, I'm going down. Welcome.
Congressman John Lewis started this day at 7 a.m.
The debate for Ways and Means.
Today, the House will vote on health care. Oh, Ways and Means. And between committee meetings and his scheduled late afternoon speech on the House floor,
repeal before senior to pay.
Wherever he goes, he's greeted with hero status.
How you doing?
By Democrats.
We're with the UAW.
And Republicans.
Yes, how you doing?
And plain ordinary people.
You are a hero of this nation.
John Lewis is a living legend, one of the architects of a desegregated America, alongside Dr. Martin Luther King, whom he wishes could still give him guidance.
Even sometimes when I'm sitting on the floor of the House, maybe I'm going to speak, maybe I'm going to say something. I said to myself, I wonder what would Dr. King do? I wonder what would Dr. King say?
Private thoughts about the great man who changed Lewis's life and put him, too, on the path of greatness.
I had been hurt, so I had a patch on my head.
President Obama will honor John Lewis with the Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor a president can give.
It is a great honor.
He was told a few months ago.
And I said, Mr. President, you need to stop. You keep on talking, you're going to make me cry. And he sort of said, go ahead and cry.
And you did?
I did.
Recognition of his work, conducted in the streets of Nashville and Montgomery, Birmingham and Selma back in the 60s. Work with Dr. King that paved the way for such an honor to be bestowed by the nation's first black president. Have you thought about what you'll say?
I will be accepting it on behalf of not just myself, but countless individuals that have stood in those unmovable lines in Selma trying to register to vote.
For those who sat at lunch counters and went on freedom rides 50 years ago, and for those beaten, even murdered for the sake of equality.
It says something about the distance that I've come.
It says something about a power greater than himself and a destiny he had to live. From the Jim Crow days of Troy, Alabama, to the halls of Congress, to the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Congressman John Lewis's life journey is nothing short of a purposed miracle.
We're going to walk together.
When I heard the words of Dr. King on old radio, it seemed like he was saying, you too, John Lewis, can do something.
And he started a journey not for the faint of heart.
Does it ever cross your mind, wow, how did I have the nerve?
Well, every so often, it sort of said, why? How did you sit on those lunch counter stools and let someone spit on you or put a lighted cigarette out in your hair? How do you stay there and let someone pull you off of the stool and beat you? But that's by the grace of God.
It wasn't until he got arrested that his mother finally learned he'd joined the civil rights movement.
So she wrote me a letter, and my middle name is Robert. She said, "Dear Robert, you went off to school to get an education. You need to get out of this mess before you get hurt."
He didn't listen. Leading a march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma proved a mother's intuition true.
I have a scar right here and one in the top of my head. If you feel right there, just a little dent.
Yeah.
Lewis never imagined violence that day. He just thought he'd be carted off to jail.
I was wearing a backpack, and in this backpack I had 2 books, an apple, an orange, toothpaste, and toothbrush. This is the first meeting to plan the March on Washington. This is the so-called Big Six.
On the left, a 23-year-old John Lewis, who would be the youngest speaker on one of the nation's most historic days. He still remembers his speech.
So you tell us to wait. You tell us to be patient. We cannot wait. We cannot be patient. We want our freedom, and we want it now.
Of the big 6 leaders of the civil rights movement, John Lewis is considered the most courageous the movement has ever produced. He's also the only one of the 6 still living.
You never know where what I call the spirit of history is going to lead you. A lot of times we come out here.
The man who so defiantly challenged the nation years ago is now part of this nation's establishment, with a reminder every day just outside his office window.
I understand that you really love poetry.
Well, I love poetry. I love music.
A humble man whose work helped change a nation.
Favorite music? Kind of music?
Gospel. I love gospel music.
A national treasure still in the fight for justice and equality.
Favorite song, favorite artist?
Well, one of my favorite songs is gospel song is Order My Steps. Order my steps.
Perhaps because it seems something beyond himself has indeed ordered his steps.
What memory of your life would you want to relive?
Maybe, just maybe, when we were walking between Selma and Montgomery with Dr. King. The sun was shining, and we were just walking, talking. And every now and then someone would sing a song. It was like a holy march. I felt like God Almighty was walking with us.
Thank you. I'm kind of excited, kind of nervous, because I'm meeting somebody that's really important.
Remodeling a shower or bath can seem daunting. It can lead to a big mess.
dream about.
That's amazing. This is a church where Dr. King actually preached.
Well, we're getting ready to talk to Congressman Lewis.
As you sit face to face with this living legend, I pray that you appreciate what he did to make today possible for all of us.
I'm kind of excited, kind of nervous because I'm meeting somebody that's really important, and I'm looking forward to meeting him today.
Today you will have a rare opportunity to meet this giant who at times risked his own life for so many. I pray his words will inspire and motivate you to continue in the spirit of selflessness to better your community and make a difference in the world.
I've heard very little about him.
The stories of the struggle will be held as sacred as a family heirloom, and that's why I share them with you now.
I've been waiting for this a long time.
Thank you.
Sometimes I think we take the civil rights movement of old for granted, but it didn't just happen.
The future holds endless potential for each of you, thanks to men like Congressman Lewis. Don't ever forget the shoulders on which you stand.
How you doing? Fine, good to see you. Good to meet you. Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
One day, many years from now, you will say with great pride, I met Congressman John Lewis, and you will say it the same way you would say, I met the president.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. I hope you never forget the sacrifices made so that you don't experience the hatred and the racism that nearly claimed his life and the lives of so many others.
I think it's important to tell the stories and to tell the stories over and over again. It's important for our children to know the distance, the progress we've made.
What was it like for you when you were my age? I'm 16. What was it like for you going through the segregation and all that stuff for you then with Henry?
I grew up in rural Alabama. When I was 16, I saw those signs that said white men, white waiting, colored waiting. As a young child, I was bused long distance to get to an all-black school. I never attended an integrated school or desegregated school. It was all black. So I would ask my mother, ask my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why segregation? Why racial discrimination? And they would almost say like, boy, don't be asking questions like that. Don't you get in trouble. Don't you get in the way. But Dr. King and Rosa Parks and others inspired me to get in trouble, to get in the way. And I've been getting in the way and getting in trouble ever since. At the age of 16, with some of my brothers and sisters and first cousins, we went down to the public library in the little town of Troy, Alabama, trying to get library cards, trying to check out some books. And we were told by the librarian that the library was for whites only and not for colors.
Tell me, when you look at this picture, how do you feel?
When I look at that picture, I feel like we're standing at a point of no return. We could not turn back. So we had been planted there by some force, maybe by history itself, but we couldn't turn back. We had to do it. Because people in Selma, Alabama, in other parts of the state, other parts of the American South could not register to vote simply because of the color of their skin. When we were marching from Selma to Montgomery and we crossed the bridge, I was walking beside a young man by the name of Jose Williams. And as we walked to the highest point on that bridge, down below we saw a sea of blue, Alabama State Troopers. And we kept walking. We came within a hearing distance of the state troopers. And a man said, this is an unlawful march.
You have to disperse, your orders to disperse, go home or go to your church. This march will not continue.
And Jose said, Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray. And the major said, troopers, advance. They started pushing us and beating us. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick and was knocked down and left unconscious. All these years later, I don't recall, I made it back across that bridge through the streets of Selma, back to that little church. But I do recall being back at the church. I think someone probably literally carried me back to the church. And they asked me to say something to the audience. There were more than 2,000 people on the outside trying to get in. The church was full. And I stood up and said something like, I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam, but cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama, to protect people who only desires to register to vote. The next thing I knew, I'd been admitted to a local hospital in Selma.
Were you ever afraid of what was ahead?
No, I was never afraid, because we're trained to not be afraid and to move on in spite of what could happen to any one of us. I knew when I was sitting in or going on a freedom ride that I could be beaten, I could be killed, but I felt, and I think we all felt, that our cause was so right and so necessary that we have to move on in spite of it all.
How hard was it for you guys to uphold that nonviolence thing? Because I know it was me, personally, I probably wouldn't have been into that nonviolence thing. How hard was that?
Well, if you had studied the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, we had role playing, we had social drama, we studied. We prepared ourselves before going on a sit-in, before participating in a march. We became disciplined. We became believers in the philosophy of nonviolence. And when someone would spit on us, or pour hot water, hot coffee, or hot chocolate on us, or maybe try to put a cigarette out in our hair or down our back, we tried to take it. And we didn't strike back. That's what Gandhi taught us. We studied Gandhi, we studied what he attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. We studied what Dr. King was doing in Montgomery. So many of us grew to accept nonviolence, not simply as a technique or as a tactic, but as a way of life, as a way of living.
You're a very brave man.
Well, I'm not sure whether I was brave or not. I just tried to do what I thought was right and tried to be part of an effort to make our country different and make it possible for all of our citizens to become registered voters.
May I have a hug?
Yes, yes, for me. Thank you so much.
What would you charge my generation to do as we go forward?
Ooey gooey, melty, mouth-watering, chocolatey, baked-to-order warm cookies. It can only be Tiff's Treats, the original warm cookie delivery.
What would you charge my generation to do as we go forward?
I think it's important for your generation and for all of us to do our part to try to encourage and get people to become participants in the democratic process. In another time, not that many years ago, people were asked things like, how many bubbles in a bar of soap? How many jelly beans in a jar? People are not going to be asked that today. People won't be beaten in jail for participating. So we got to continue to get people to participate. Every vote will count and must count.
Bullying is a big problem right now in schools today. What do you think kids should do to stop the bullying unviolently?
Bullying is a big problem. It's a major problem. We got to teach all young people the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. Dr. King said on one occasion that we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish as fools.
Most of my school is predominantly white students. I think we have a pretty good cultural mix in there. What is that like for you to see that today?
When I was growing up, I didn't see that. I wanted to attend a little college when I graduated from high school, only 10 miles from my home, called Troy State College then. It's known as Troy University now. It didn't admit me because I was black. I go back to the same school now to speak to the black and white students there. And they gave me an honorary degree. So I tell the students at Troy University, I got my education the easy way from Troy University.
That's funny.
When I see and visit integrated school, it is very moving to me because it said that we've come a distance. We made a lot of progress. I wish Dr. King was still here to see it, that his dream is becoming real. Sometimes I cry tears of joy and happiness to know the distance we've come, the progress that we've made. I feel more than lucky. I feel very blessed.
Dear Congressman Lewis, it was such an honor to meet you in person. I was also glad that we had a chance as teens to talk to you on issues about racism, bullying, and all types of discrimination.
I'll never forget the time he gave me a hug and we walked together to the tomb of Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Clara Scott King.
Meeting with you has been a life-changing experience. You've given me so much perspective on the struggles that you had to endure, as well as the other civil rights leaders.
One thing that stood out to me was the fact that everyone in the nonviolent civil rights movement was trained to be nonviolent and actually succeeded in not retaliating.
You are an amazing man. You are definitely one of the strongest people I know. Without you, my life would have been totally different. Respectfully, Tyler.
Meeting Congressman Lewis definitely had a profound impact on those young lives. So, where are they now? 9 years later, Paris Whitney is now a sophomore studying English at Georgia State University on an academic scholarship, I should add. Tyler Johnson is a senior in the Grady School of Journalism at the University of Georgia. His brother Kyle is a graduate of Wake Forest University. He is currently senior marketing coordinator at Katz Networks. Chesley McNeil Jr. is a graduate of Valdosta State University. He's a systems manager at Coca-Cola Bottling Company. And Nicole Fuller is a doctor of physical therapy in Marietta, working with patients with neurological injuries.
Up next, John Lewis, in his own words, as he reflects on one of the most turbulent years in our nation's history.
Without you,
Our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now.
John Lewis delivered his speech at the March on Washington in August of 1963. There were quite a few more monumental moments to occur that year. Some would bring the nation and the world to its knees. In his own words, Congressman Lewis describes his role in those key moments that shaped the civil rights movement.
1963 was a very unbelievable, disturbing year. There was so much discontent all over America. Governor Wallace had been inaugurated as the governor of Alabama.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
When I saw what was happening in Birmingham, it was unreal, unbelievable. I never thought that it could happen any place in America, that you can see fire hoses really picking up young people, including children, and dropping them. And the fire hoses was strong enough to take bark off of trees, or seeing young children being chased by police dogs. America wept in shame. People couldn't take it. I remember the morning of the bombing of the church. I was home visiting my relatives in Alabama. And I got a call from the office here in Atlanta saying go to Birmingham. And I made it to Birmingham, and my friend Julian Bond, who was the communication director for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, met me there. And the two of us stood across the street from the church, not saying a word to each other, just standing there, almost in a prayerful mood. It was a sad and dark hour. September 1963. It would be fair to say, because of what happened in Birmingham, it was a greater commitment, a greater sense of dedication, a greater sense of stick-to-itness that we have to do it. We cannot allow the death of these 4 little girls be in vain. In November, President Kennedy is assassinated, and I feel like during that period something died in all of us. I was stunned, I was shocked. You know, I met him twice. I saw him from a distance when he was campaigning. I admired him, I loved him. For a long while after the assassination, I collected Kennedy $50.
Now the time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them.
He inspired me. He inspired me. He would listen. He was a sympathetic referee in the struggle for civil rights.
Remodeling a shower or bath can seem daunting. It can lead to a big mess, possibly making your bathroom unusable for days or even weeks. But with West Shore Home, the whole process is actually super easy. Hey everybody, I'm here with BJ Worzen, the owner of West Shore Home. BJ, tell us, how is your company making this daunting bath remodeling process a breeze?
So Joe, we're really different than all the other companies because everything that we
The Honorable John Lewis is a giant, not only in Atlanta, but his legacy is known all around the globe. He put himself and his life on the front lines time and time again, leading the way with a vision of a better world. The Congressman's lifetime dedication inspired the Board of Governors of 11 Alive to bestow him our highest award. Here is a portion of our Community Service Awards from 2015 that paid tribute to the ultimate foot soldier for change.
One day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, 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 glory. Glory. Oh, glory. Glory.
Hands to the heavens, no man, no weapon. Formed against, yes, glory is destined. Everyday women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings. The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us. Justice is juxtaposition in us. Justice for all just ain't specific enough. Once sundown, his spirit is living in us. True and living in us. Resistance is us. That's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walk through Ferguson with our hands up. When it goes down, we women and man up. They say stay down, and we stand up. Shots we on the ground, the camera panned up. King pointed to the mountaintop, and we ran up.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, 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 one day. When the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, 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 glory, oh, glory, hey, glory. Now the war is not over, victory isn't won, but we'll fight on to the finish. And then when it's all done, we'll cry glory, oh glory, glory, oh glory,
Selma's now for every man, woman, and child. Even Jesus got his crown in front of a crowd. They march with the torch, we gon' run with it now. Never look back, we done gone hundreds of miles. From dark roads, heroes, to become a hero. Racing the league of justice, his power was the people. Enemy is lethal, a king became regal. Saw the face of Jim Crow under a bald eagle. The biggest weapon is to stay peaceful. We sing, our music is the that we bleed through. Somewhere in the dream we had an epiphany. Now we right the wrongs in history. No one can win a war individually. Takes the wisdom of the elders and young people's energy. Welcome to the story we call victory. The coming of the Lord, my eyes have seen the glory.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, 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 one day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, 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 glory, oh, glory, hey, glory, oh, glory. When the war is done, when it's all said and done, we'll cry glory, oh, glory, yeah, yeah. We'll cry glory, yeah, oh, glory, hey.
11 alive. This is too much. Too much. Just too much. I'm supposed to be strong, can stand up and fight in a nonviolent fashion. Supposed to be brave and courageous. But you're making me cry. And I had an executive session with myself earlier. I said, I'm not going to cry. And then you come here and sing glory. Oh, glory. I'm going to cry. This is too much. Thank you. Thank you. The only thing I try to do is to help out. I'm not worthy to be honored, to receiving an award with all these other unbelievable, gifted souls is too much. Growing up in rural Alabama as a young child, I didn't like segregation and racial discrimination. I didn't like the signs that said white only, colored only. And I would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? And they were, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But the individuals like Rosa Parks, 15 years old when I heard of her. The words and leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me to find a way to get in the way. So I got in the way. I got in trouble. You know, I just went out there and pushed and pulled. And that's what I try to do every day. Just try to help someone. Try to make things a little bit better. My last arrest, and you saw it on the video, 8 other members of Congress and 200 citizens, we just went out and said we want the Speaker to bring up a comprehensive immigration bill, for we felt it doesn't make sense in our country to have more than 12 million people living in the shadow. That's not right, it's not fair, and it's not just. We have to do something about it. We all come from some other place. The late Ethel Randolph used to say from time to time, who was the dean of black leadership during the March on Washington, maybe our foremothers and our forefathers all came to this great land in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. So it doesn't matter whether we're African American or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. We are one people. We're one family. We all live in the same house. Not just the American house, but the world house. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it another way. We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish as fools. Each of us must do what we can to leave this little piece of real estate, this little planet, this little spaceship, a little cleaner and a little greener and a little more peaceful for generation yet unborn. 11 alive, thank you. I didn't know you could make me cry, but you did. Thank you.
We're quite glory.
Distance has been on all of our minds lately. That we've been too close to some.
John Lewis. How do you memorialize this giant of a man and do it justice? I don't know. I do know one thing, though. We didn't deserve him. The raw, unvarnished, unadulterated young man from Troy, Alabama. We didn't deserve him. The passionate, morally righteous man who got into trouble despite his mother's warning, but who understood the difference between bad trouble and good trouble. No, we didn't deserve him. But Lord, did we need him. From the angry 23-year-old who spoke at the March on Washington to the moral compass and conscience of Congress, John Lewis from the very start was always fiery and always fiercely committed to moving America to live out its ideals, come hell or high water, because America seemed not to be able to do it on its own. Even 50 years after King's death, John Lewis was still on the battlefield for justice. Just a month ago, in the Black Lives Matter protest, he was right there in the thick of it as he battled for his own life. Undaunted, unintimidated, even in his frailty, he fought. For you, for me, for all of us. The downtrodden, the hurt, the marginalized, the woke always counted on John Lewis in the fight for right because they knew the powerful would listen. His work had earned that kind of reverence. And blessed, he saw many fruits of his legacy. But in these last few years, he also began to see the clock turning back. And it's likely that God said, "No worries, son, my good and faithful servant. You alone have done the work of mighty men. You have seen much progress. No need to see any more ugly. Time now to rest." John Lewis was never boastful, never arrogant. After all, he is one of the greatest heroes of our time. Yet he was the most giving, the most humble man you could ever meet. I invited John Lewis to my mother's 80th birthday party many years ago because they had previously connected over their love of the Braves. I never expected him to actually show up, but he did. That's the kind of man he was. And many of you have similar stories, which is why we're seeing countless pictures all over social media of him with just regular folk, because he never saw himself as anything more than regular folk. Only difference, John Lewis allowed himself to be used and moved by the hand of God in the face of violence and pure evil, and he did it without question and without fear. John Lewis was a good man, a gentle man, a magnificent soul, a shining light on a hill. Lord knows we still need him, maybe more now than ever. He's left us with much work still to be done. But God has spoken, challenging us now to have faith in this new generation of freedom fighters. And I believe they will see to it that we finally deserve this visionary, impatient, sacrificial lamb in the body of a raw, restless, and remarkable John Lewis.
Remembering John Lewis, proudly sponsored by Atlanta Life Insurance Company.
Without you, our team at Mungie & Associates would not exist.
We are not asking you to be a client.
We're asking you to be good to others.
To stand together.
As a unified nation.
To see that we are all one.
At Atlanta Life Insurance, we know it's important to meet your expectations. Our founder's vision started over a century ago and continues to grow, offering personal insurance, commercial insurance, and group reinsurance. With a foundation that teaches at-risk inner-city kids skills to become successful business leaders, only asking that they pay it forward. While we've grown in status with you and our partners over the years, we've never forgotten how we began and what it took to get where we are today. Atlanta Life Insurance Company, delivering peace of mind for over 100 years.
Getting legal help can make all the difference in the amount of compensation and benefits you receive after an injury. For your free consultation with a Montlick attorney, simply dial #WIN from your cell phone. That's #946.
Hi, I'm Andy Stanley. You may have been taught that religion is the solution, but when you look around, you may wonder if perhaps religion is actually the problem. If so, you are not alone. So let's talk about it this weekend on Your Move.
Our law firm is the first to offer an evaluate without a wait guarantee. Remember, you don't pay a dime unless we win your case. Call now and find out what your case is really worth.
Mungie & Associates, 678-INJURED.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Hullinger. This is 11 Alive special coverage of the final crossing as Congressman John Lewis is remembered in his home state of Alabama. Shortly, his casket will leave Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma and cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, just like Congressman Lewis did on Bloody Sunday 55 years ago. Joining me is Aisha Howard. And Aisha, the tributes began Saturday in Troy and now today 2 cities in Alabama, Selma and Montgomery, that played big roles in the battle for American civil rights.
Such a momentous occasion for the nation and even beyond, Jeff. Congressman Lewis is going to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the final time today. He made it in 1965 and almost paid for it with his life. He's been back, returned several times since then, including earlier this year. Today, his body will be taken to the Alabama State Capitol in Montgomery, where it will lie in state late this afternoon and evening, and it's going to take the same route to Montgomery as the same route they used in 1965 for that march, Jeff.
We are also pleased to be joined by Brenda Wood. Brenda, it is great to have you here with your marvelous history and your friendship with Congressman Lewis over the decades. A day that, you know, we never thought would come, yet at the same time, these images, the thought of him going across that bridge in a casket is one that touches all of the hearts and souls of any of us who knew him.
Absolutely. You know, every time I think about and say out loud what's going to happen today, I get chills. He's not going to just cross that bridge like he has done so many times in the past that we've seen on live TV with thousands of people behind him. His horse-drawn carriage with his casket will go across that bridge alone. And that is going to be a dramatic moment. I just got chills saying it out loud again, because when you think about the history, when you think about the man, when you think about the circumstances, that era, and there was so much hatred when he first crossed that bridge, the first, second, third time. This time, it will really be a moment of triumph and the end of a chapter, that this man who faced cruelty and who lived by courage will cross that bridge alone. It will say so much to America. I cannot wait to see that moment. Naima?
That boy from Troy, born the son of sharecroppers, born to change the world. And now this community in Selma is remembering that pivotal moment that changed history, that pivotal moment that also marked his legacy 55 years ago. There are people out here. It's not a huge crowd at the moment, but like you guys mentioned, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, so iconic, has so much historical significance, serving as the location of that pivotal moment during the march to Montgomery, when hundreds of peaceful marchers were stopped on the bridge by Alabama state troopers. And journalists during that time, 55 years ago, capturing history, letting the world know the ugly, brutal confrontation that was taking place here. That day, as you mentioned, would be known as Bloody Sunday. Now, Atlanta's very own Willie A. Watkins Funeral Home is providing services for the multi-state celebration. Civil rights warrior John Lewis will be carried, as you mentioned, on a horse-drawn carriage for the final time, cross that bridge that changed history. And when they pause right under the name, he will be greeted by family, and he will also be greeted by Alabama state troopers. That alone is significant, because 55 years ago, when he was greeted by Alabama state troopers, it was not for a joyous moment. It was not for a peaceful moment. It was a moment that took his life. And also considering the fact that over the span of his lifetime, he was arrested at least 45 times, 45 arrests, from sit-ins, marches, demonstrations. Any of those moments could have taken his life, but God saved him so that he could transform this nation. And as soon as we find out any more information on the exact timing, it's hard to predict right now, but we'll make sure to give you guys live coverage on air and online. Brenda?
All right, Naima, thanks very much. I'm going to throw back to Jeff Hollinger here in the studio as well. We're looking at Congresswoman Tracy Sewell right there. All of this is being staged right before the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Is being staged at the Brown Chapel. This is a very historic church because all of the stagings during the height of the civil rights movement there in Selma happened at Brown Chapel with the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, John Lewis, Hosea Williams, Martin Luther King, all of them there gathered at Brown Chapel. And that's where they planned their marches. They planned their daily protests and demonstrations and sit-ins. Everything happened there. So that, among other things in that city, is a tremendous landmark for the civil rights movement.
And you're talking about Brown Chapel. It is also the point when Congressman Lewis came across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and his skull was fractured, and it was not clear whether he would survive or not. It was Brown Chapel where he went, where he collapsed, where he was taken care of. And again, as you mentioned, it was the movement's headquarters. And those scars on his head, those bone scars, you could see the rest of his life. It impacted him in ways seen and unseen. But that point of reference, that Brown Chapel right there, is such an important part, not only in American civil rights movement, but in the life of John Lewis.
Yes, as I understand, there is a statue out in front of Brown Chapel of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And, you know, it's interesting, the information leading up to, the details leading up to the Bloody Sunday. You know, there was a little bit of struggle between the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which John Lewis was the executive director, and the SCLC, which Martin Luther King was a part of, Hosea Williams a part of. They all sort of were trying to plan their own demonstration. Right. Dr. King, of course, came in. He was the powerhouse. He came in on the request of the residents of Selma to stage a demonstration, which he did, to go to that bridge. That was one of the 3 marches that happened across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But Bloody Sunday, John Lewis walked across that as the only representative of SNCC. And he had, at the beginning, some 600 peaceful protesters gathered at the foot of that bridge, ready to cross. And they stood there. We see the pictures over and over again, the black and white picture of John Lewis at the head of the line, standing across from the Alabama State Troopers.
And I always think of the Reverend Hosea Williams also when I think of Bloody Sunday, because he was there with Congressman Lewis as well. He was such an integral part of this.
And was injured as well.
And was injured as well. I think sometimes Reverend Williams is sort of lost in this. He has been gone now for about 20 years.
Gosh, it's hard to believe.
It is hard to believe. Yeah. Again, I know we say this a lot, Brenda. We talk about Atlanta without Reverend Williams, without Congressman Lewis. I mean, it's very difficult to comprehend.
To wrap your head around.
Such huge voices in the city for so long, but you know, I'm just thinking of Reverend Williams this morning too.
Yes, because he was very much a part of the front line, if you will, of that march across the bridge. And when you consider that they stood there, I cannot imagine the inner fortitude of not just John Lewis and Hosea Williams and the high-profile names that we've come to know associated with the civil rights movement, but the inner fortitude of all of those hundreds of people, ultimately thousands of people who would cross that bridge for equal rights and freedom and justice. When you think of the fortitude of all of those individuals, those foot soldiers, if you will, those nameless, faceless people who really, without them, the movement would not have happened. You could have a great John Lewis, but he's only great because of the foot soldiers behind him. He was able to have that kind of leadership, that kind of passion that infused everybody else. And when you look at that picture, the Alabama State Troopers on one side, John Lewis, Hosea Williams on the front lines, and all those people behind, and they're standing there facing off against each other, and the fortitude to stay peaceful. The fortitude not to yell, not to scream, not to, just turn into an angry mob. especially when you consider now, at the start of this, the troopers move towards a standing still body of people and begin to attack. And if you look closely at that video, it's almost as if it's like dominoes. The troops just begin to push the people down. John Lewis, the first one to fall, and of course, as you said, his head, his skull nearly cracked.
Aisha Howard, you know, the pictures, the images from Selma, when the rest of America saw that on the nightly news on NBC and CBS and ABC, and there were only 3 channels at the time, it really changed the lilt of the civil rights movement in the United States. It brought it home to the living rooms in places in Iowa, in Nevada, in Colorado.
The media played a huge role in this because the nation saw it and was outraged by what happened that Sunday. And that really changed the course of history because it was a result of this that we got the Voting Rights Act just a few months later.
And I feel like that's what we're witnessing right now. The fact that a future generation can actually know what took place. We're providing the pictures. As I listen to the both of you give context, able to watch it, actually to see those black and white photos during a time where, you know, they were so fresh and so raw, I feel like we're flipping through the pages of a history book. But the catch here is this isn't in the history books. When I think about my time in school, and when I think about what we are taught about our history in this fashion, it's such a small piece. It's Black History Month, and a lot of this is really left out. So what I can really take from this moment and appreciate about this moment is the generation that's learning about this in real time. And I think it's going to be change for years and years to come. We're going to take you back live now to Brown Chapel, where the service has started before the bridge crossing.
That we too will stand for justice, that we will stand for righteousness, that we will lift our voices for you, lift our voices for the cause that is just and right. Until we hear your welcome voice, say, well done, good and faithful servant. As Congressman Lewis crosses the Alabama River, we rejoice today knowing that he's already crossed the Jordan River and he's now resting in your presence. In Jesus' mighty name, we pray and ask all these things. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the structured program, but we just have a few notes that we need to give everyone. First and foremost, if we can just show some appreciation to the Congresswoman for helping to put this wonderful program together. And of course, the pastor.
All right, so we're outside of Brown Chapel right now, and the program has come to an end, Brenda and Aisha, and now it will be time for the horse-drawn caisson, which will pause at the apex of the Edmund Pettus Bridge when it arrives. Family members will be in attendance. Also, the Alabama State Troopers will greet the Congressman. And Brenda, there certainly is irony in that as we ready for that sight, which I think will put a lump in a lot of throats all around the nation.
It really will. There's so much irony here, so much history happening, so much history to be recalled and remembered and memorialized in this moment. As I said earlier, when that horse-drawn carriage not only crosses the bridge alone, but it's going to stop at the apex of that bridge right under the name Edmund Pettus. And I think most people up until just recently didn't even bother to think who he was, except for the folks maybe in Selma who perhaps knew who Edmund Pettus was. But he was a Confederate soldier and also the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan.
And a U.S. Senator.
And avowed segregationist and racist. And that bridge for all these decades continues to memorialize this man. And now today, we're going to see John Lewis, the man who, in his own way, in many respects in American culture, stomped on and crushed segregation. And his body will sit there for 60 seconds under the name Edmund Pettus. The irony, the depth of that is a lot to comprehend.
And already there's been a school in Virginia that's changed its name from Robert E. Lee High School to John Lewis High School. And there is a petition circulating to also have the Edmund Pettus Bridge renamed after Congressman John Lewis as well.
You know, Aisha, I cannot imagine that that's not going to happen.
Yes.
You know, with the legacy and the icon of John Lewis, how do you not rename that bridge?
Congressman Lewis was always quiet on that subject.
Well, but you know what? Because he was humble.
Of course.
And that's a subject that really heightens him, right? And he was not about that. John Lewis was not about popularity. He was about purpose. And that was really his creed. He wasn't trying to be the most powerful, the most important, the biggest name. He wasn't trying to be. He became that.
He never changed,
He wasn't
though.
trying to be that.
No matter how his celebrity grew and his significance in American life, and I think there was a realization of that after the 1980s, after he beat Julian Bond in 1986.
Which was a nasty race.
In an upset. It was an ugly race. It was an unforgettable race that any of us who were here during that time, it's still astonishing to think about and to read about how difficult it was, how spirited it was. But John Lewis never changed, and the acknowledgement of his greatness only grew as he was in Congress.
I want to pick up on that. That was a nasty race. And I just saw a piece of video of John Lewis. You know, there are just so many tributes to him all over the media, all over all platforms of media. And there was an interview he did with regards to that race against Julian Bond. And, you know, they were very good friends and compatriots when it came to the civil rights movement. They worked in tandem.
And very different.
Very different personalities, very different upbringings, very different styles. They were competitors in that race. John Lewis, if you recall, ultimately challenged Julian Bond to a drug test. And it became the issue of the race all the way up through the runoff. And many believe that because Julian Bond did not answer that call and did not do the drug test, that was the turning point for John Lewis, and he, to the shock of Atlanta, won that race many years later, and he won it at the cost of his friendship with Julian Bond. Over time.
They had a reconciliation.
They had a reconciliation. And in this interview, John Lewis said, if I had to do it over again, referring to the challenge during the course of the campaign, he said, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it if I had to do it again.
But they were so different, and they brought, I think, so many people in Atlanta. It was eye-opening to a lot of us, and I hadn't lived here that long in 1986, to see the different factions of the African-American community, and some backing John Lewis and his take on American life, others backing Julian Bond, who was a highly educated man.
Very articulate
an intellectual,
man, yes.
Very articulate, one of the great, you know, even hosted Saturday Night Live during his lifetime. He was an extraordinary speaker, thinker, and performer.
Yeah.
John Lewis was different.
Almost the antithesis, with the exception of the same passion and purpose that they both had.
Different ways to arrive at truth.
Absolutely, both of them, but vastly different. And when you think about, you know, what Atlanta was, and many consider the Black Mecca of higher educated African Americans, you know, you had Sweet Auburn, you had people who were middle class and wealthy African Americans. John Lewis seemed to be, Julian Bond seemed to be the one that just kind of fit right into that narrative. Not a John Lewis from Troy, Alabama.
Son of a sharecropper.
But you know what? I maintain, and many others do as well, John Lewis's destiny was already in place. His feet were already planted in the direction he was supposed to move. So that was what happened was exactly what was supposed to happen.
Let's go to Naima Abdullahi, who is at the Edmund Pettus Bridge right now as we await the casket of Congressman Lewis.
Jeff, the crowd is gathering right here on Broad Street leading up to the bridge. John Lewis, the carriage ride should be coming from Alabama Avenue all the way from Brown Chapel AME Church. The crowd is waiting here. As you can imagine, there are people from many chapters of his life, those who knew him from Troy, those who knew him in Selma, those who knew him in Montgomery, and people who traveled all the way from Atlanta to also be here. You know, one thing we all need to reflect on is, even though he was known all over the world, he had one hometown. His chapter 1, page 1 was in the area of Troy. And now he's going to be reunited. He's already reunited with all of those who marched alongside him. So many who never went into the history books because those moments were either never documented for the world to see those ugly truths, or the fact that they may have died and put their body and blood on the line, sacrificing everything, never seeing victory in their lifetime so that future generations can reach those benefits that they fought so hard for. That boy from Troy will come down here on Broad Street all the way to Edmund Pettus Bridge and head towards Montgomery. His last few days here in Alabama, a state that shaped him for who he is. Some people are out here singing This Little Light of Mine. They're singing the songs of the movement, the songs that really spiritually fulfilled him and energized him throughout those many days. So yeah, everyone is waiting here. They're documenting this historic moment. People have their GoPros out, their cell phones, they're live streaming. So yes, we'll make sure that we keep you guys posted as soon as we see that carriage headed towards this road. Aisha, back to you.
Just such a historic morning to take in overall, and a lot of people don't understand the significance of these locations and what actually happened and the context of these streets that this horse-drawn carriage is going to go over. This is going to cross Court Street. That is where slave auctions were held. This is going to cross the same route that the marchers took from Selma to Montgomery. And so it's just so symbolic as we watch the horses start to come in here, so symbolic of what we're seeing today. And I just can't reiterate enough that this is a part of history that we are getting here in real time. And I think it's a day that we will never, ever forget. We see the black and white images of John Lewis, but to know and think of future years, how these images that we're bringing to you live right now are going to be used in the future, I just can't help but to be overjoyed by the fact that we're getting to witness this and bring this to our future children, and even our children who are coming up in grade school right now. Listening to you guys, I'm like, these are so many details that people just don't know, and it's so deeply rooted.
You know, there's a certain irony too, as the wagon there, the caisson, is nestled in this community, you can see, which is a lot of people that are struggling, people that are trying to make it. And John Lewis, his entire life, was a voice for people that lived in apartments all along the fence right there in Selma, Brenda. He never lost sight of the fact of trying to give people who did not have a voice in this country resonance and meaning and a sense of a seat at the table.
Absolutely. He was a man about the people. And you know, that fed right into his personality. He was humble because he knew none of this was about him alone. Though, you know, his experience in Troy as a young man, a little boy, facing segregation, he personally was offended and took affront to it and wanted to make a change because it affected him, it affected his family, affected the people he knew. But as he got older, his vision and his purpose got broader and bigger, and he knew that those people there who he grew up with and people beyond who just, as I have said, regular folks, sharecroppers and school teachers and janitors and bus drivers, those people deserved a better life. And they should not be penalized because of the color of their skin. He was a bigger person than just himself.
We're looking live now here at Brown Chapel, Brenda, as the Armed Forces body bearers receive the casket of Congressman John Lewis here from the historic Brown Chapel. We're going to watch now as the procession gets underway. The streets are lined and the community is awaiting this very historic moment. The route is set and the program has now officially started.
Yes, we're locked in the bridge.
Mark time. There's hold. Left wheel. 5 side steps. March. Forward. March. One side step. March. Ready. Step.
There you have the armed forces body bearers who placed that casket on this horse-drawn carriage. It is now headed to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge solo. Just that carriage with John Lewis. And the meaning of that, the memorial of that place, the memorial of the accomplishments of the civil rights movement, the crushing of segregation, segregationist laws in this country, all of that will be symbolized as that horse-drawn carriage goes across the bridge. It is going to be a dramatic moment, to say the least.
It is impossible not to reflect upon the world of 1965 when Bloody Sunday occurred. Governor George C. Wallace, segregation now, segregation forever, and the amount of vitriol on race, the cruelty, the unrelenting views of segregation and supremacy that were of that time, and what John Lewis faced, and Reverend Hosea Williams and Dr. King and Ambassador Andrew Young and Ralph David Abernathy and
all of those great
the Reverend
names.
Orange, Fred Shuttlesworth. I mean, you can go on and on with these names of these. C.T. Vivian.
Yes.
I mean, C.T. Vivian, who passed away the same day, same night as Congressman Lewis, who faced the Selma sheriff by the name of Jim Clark. And all the Reverend Vivian was doing was standing there trying to get African Americans the right, the ability to go in and vote. The sheriff then sucker punches him, knocks him to the ground, the result of 11 stitches in Reverend Vivian's mouth, and he continued with his diatribe, his speech toward, trying to make sure that there was just the right to vote.
Yeah, these men were incomparable. I mean, how did they have the courage, the commitment, the persistence to do what they did? This whole thing, the Selma to Montgomery marches that were organized by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and prior to that to SNCC, those marches, and they were 3 in total, were organized as part of the Selma voting rights movement. And as I said earlier, as a result, the Voting Rights Act of '65 was passed just later that summer. But I want to read something from as we watch this horse-drawn carriage head towards the Edmund Pettus Bridge. This is from John Lewis's book, Walking with the Wind. And he wrote about that Bloody Sunday. He says, "I cannot count the number of marches I've participated in my lifetime, but there was something peculiar about this one. It was more than disciplined. It was somber and subdued, almost like a funeral procession. No one was jostling or pushing to get to the front, as often happened with these things. I don't know if there was a feeling that something was going to happen, or if the people simply sensed that this was a special procession, a leaderless march. There were no big names up front, no celebrities. This was just plain folks moving through the streets of Selma." That's how he described that Sunday before it became a Bloody Sunday. There must have been a tension in the crowd that was almost indescribable. And as he said, who knows why everybody was so somber, but they were. And then, of course, we know what happened afterwards.
Congressman Lewis bore scars on his head from that incident for the rest of his life. And as you also see these pictures, you think about the film Selma that really has taught so many young people what his role was and what this place, this parcel of earth that has meant so much to the United States and since. Stephen James in 2014 portrayed Congressman Lewis in the film.
And I think it's so interesting to think he was 25 years old at that time.
Isn't that something?
25. I think we think of these giants as we see them currently.
What were you doing at 25?
Exactly. What are you doing with your life to impact this type of change, to have your life remembered across 3 states? You are lying in state in 3 different locations. How will you live your life to impact, even on the smallest scale? What can you do to be remembered in such a way that you had this level of impact and never became untouchable? Still was out there marching with the people, You know, when the Black Lives Matter memorial was unveiled in D.C., just a couple of months ago, he was there taking a photo to the very end, fighting, never ever let up. How significant is it, the fact that this was all about voting rights, and we are in an election year?
Yes.
It is so telling, and the times are just so aligned with what he fought for. And so many people who have never voted before on social media saying, I plan to vote for the very first time this year. I think that's how you honor him, in the smallest way, right? But it's still a grand gesture in the grand scheme of things. Let's take you back now to the ground in Selma to Naima Abdullahi to give us perspective on what's happening as that horse-drawn carriage approaches. Naima.
Aisha, it's been a minute since we've seen cars pass by, but Willie A. Watkins Funeral Home is providing services for the funeral, and we did see some of their cars pass by. Take a look at the crowd. Everyone is waiting patiently for this historic moment, a moment that will probably take some people a lifetime to process. We're continuing to see, as you'll see a car pass by right now. We don't know how the crowd is going to react. We don't know if they're going to cheer. We don't know if they're going to sing. We don't know if there's going to be an emotional reaction. It's hard to tell at this moment because there is nothing in life that can prepare you for this very moment where Selma, a place that played a pivotal role in history, will finally say farewell to a man who shaped this town and also shaped this nation. We're also going to pan over. We see a bus pulling up right now, along with It's Hard right now. Our photographer, Luke Carter, is going to pan over so you guys can see the process and the procession start. They're starting to roll in right now. And Luke, if you can also pan over to the bridge real quick, we also want to show people that along the bridge are rose petals. Along the bridge are rose petals to honor him. Along the bridge are also flowers. And the process is starting again. Luke, if we can also turn one more time. One more time, Luke. And this is such a historic moment for this nation right now. John Lewis once said, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America. Perhaps the soul of America was embedded in him, that he was an eternal gift to this nation so that he can inspire future generations to make sure that they fight for what's right, equality, social justice, and for the betterment of mankind. John Lewis also once said, nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society. Why? Because human beings are the most dynamic link to the divine on this planet. He has started his journey of reuniting with the ancestors. From an icon to an ancestor, a well-deserved ceremonial tribute for a legend, a warrior of the civil rights movement. We don't know exactly when that horse-drawn carriage ride will start, but right now what we're seeing is that process start right now, where Selma will honor a legend and an icon. Aisha?
And Naima, as we can see, this procession is using the far right lane. Only the horse-drawn carriage will go through that flower and rose petal setup of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So this is sort of the procession that we started to see in front of Brown Chapel that's now making its way through. A very diverse crowd, a very community-based crowd there. Naima mentioned that people traveled from Atlanta as well. And I think that's very telling too, just to see how many people have come out. And we see everyone wearing their mask, not letting anything keep them from this very historic moment. And we see a couple of children in the crowd as well. Back live now here to the horse-drawn carriage, that caisson there getting ready to cross. Jeff and Brenda, this is just so momentous right now, what we're taking in.
I think as we take this in, really struck by the wagon here. It looks like 1968 in Atlanta on Auburn Avenue when Dr. King was taken from Ebenezer. The symbolism there certainly is not lost with the two horses and with the wagon as well. And also on the steps of Brown Chapel this morning, we heard the spiritual Precious Lord, which was also sung at the funeral of Dr. King in 1968. So there is that acknowledgement of the past and the history of the civil rights movement, and Dr. King, the great friend of John Lewis.
You know, this is a ceremony that is reserved for great men, JFK as well, on a horse-drawn carriage, reserved for just the greatest of us. And that, you know, one of the biggest ways that we can pay tribute to a hero, and in fact John Lewis was one of the greatest heroes of our generation, of many generations, I should say. You know, this whole thing, as Aisha mentioned, is the whole Selma to Montgomery marches was all about voting rights, trying to get the ability for African Americans, for blacks to vote. It's hard to imagine, young people probably cannot imagine not being able to vote. But that was really the lay of the land at the time. And this march that turned into Bloody Sunday really started out as, it was going to be a march to carry the body of a civil rights activist who was demonstrating for the right to vote when he was brutally beaten, shot, and killed by Alabama state troopers, Jimmy Lee Jackson. He was killed. And the idea among some of the civil rights movement leaders, John Lewis and others, was let's carry his body across the Edmund Pettus Bridge to make a point, to raise awareness so that the nation will see what Alabama has done to people, what it's doing to people, and to try to change the laws of the land. That never happened. Jimmy Lee Jackson was buried, and they never carried his body across, but that's the seed of the idea of crossing that bridge.
I always think of the story that Congressman Lewis told as well about crossing that bridge on Bloody Sunday, and he was doing it with the Reverend Hosea Williams, and together they came across and they see that line of Alabama state troopers with their batons, and they're being told via bullhorn that they need to dissipate, go home, go to their churches, and they had asked for, okay, one moment, give us a moment to pray. And just as he made the request to pray,
that's when they moved.
The troopers moved. Troopers move, and that's when the beatings commenced.
Yeah, you know, again, as Aisha mentioned, the irony of you know, sort of reliving history is a bit. We're commemorating, you know, an act that was preceded by the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. This was sort of the catalyst, this Bloody Sunday and the marches across Selma to Montgomery, the catalyst to create that Voting Rights Act that President Johnson signed in '65. And now here we are all these years later, dealing with the same issue of getting the ability for all people to be able to vote without intimidation, without suppression. We're arguing the same thing. And just the irony that history here is now repeating itself. Yes, there is in Congress right now on Capitol Hill a movement for the passage of a new Voting Rights Act that has more teeth in it to prevent current voter suppression. And I have to say, if you are against that voting rights bill, you are against John Lewis, because that's the essence of what he did right here. This is the biggest thing. He did many other things, but this Bloody Sunday and how it changed the course of history in this country and how it changed the laws, this was the apex of his activism. It was all about voting rights, the right to vote for every citizen of America. And here we are again. And if you say you love John Lewis and you say that you support his cause and he was a good man and humanitarian, great things, then you must also support the idea of voting rights for everyone.
2020 has been such an extraordinary year on so many levels, but when you think about the issues and the protests against police brutality and in communities of color, to think that Congressman Lewis would die this summer, and that C.T. Vivian would as well. And certainly they had grown older, but at the same time, you know, you looked at Congressman Lewis over the years and you always thought, my goodness, the thought of Atlanta without him, the thought of the 5th Congressional District here not being represented by John Lewis, and for him to pass quickly, as he did within the last 6 months, once the diagnosis, the public diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, there certainly is a symbolism in this year of change and this season of revolt that he would pass.
You know, I don't think I've ever seen a year like this before. Have you?
No.
I mean, you could think 1968 was an incredible year, and you know, I guess at that it seemed the world was just coming apart at the seams.
And I was so young at that time, and both of us were young. That
were you born? I'm not sure I was.
Yeah, I'm afraid I was. And but
I've been told 68 was a
I will say this in my
year.
defense. I was unable to frame the events that were going on, but as a little boy, I was frightened by them.
Yes. To see all of
terrified
it.
of
And you know, think about it. Television was we're really dating ourselves now, but television was a relatively, you know, new thing in our culture. And so to be able to watch all of this, you know, it's nothing for us to see things happening in real time now. With satellite, you know, it's so easy. But back then, to be able to see all of this unfold in front of you, you know, and the nation trying to digest and process what they were seeing, that was quite something, and it did seem like the world was coming to an end. We're going to just take a moment to watch this, this very momentous moment.
And as the horse-drawn carriage approaches the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we are taking in this time in history, an image that so many of us will remember for years and years to come. And just really thinking about the blueprint that John Lewis and C.T. Vivian really left behind, and how we can apply that blueprint today. The fact that there is currently a voting rights bill being discussed in Congress. It really leaves you with a call to action, to look at the efforts that they made, putting their lives on the line. The life of John Lewis spared in 1965 after facing death in the face after being brutally beaten by state troopers there in Selma, Alabama during that march. A bloody Sunday indeed, but the life spared, it was not in vain. It was not in vain. He continued to fight until the very, very end. And now we have a generation of leaders, of activists who can answer the charge to keep that fight going, today.
We are joined now on the telephone by Ambassador Andrew Young. Ambassador Young, thanks for being with us. We greatly appreciate it. Brenda Wood is here. I'm Jeff Hellinger, and Aisha Howard is with us as well. Your thoughts as you see these pictures unfolding this morning into this afternoon about Congressman Lewis and his casket making its way toward the Edmund Pettus Bridge?
Well, I have a funny thing about death. I don't like the ceremonies of death. We have lived with death, and we have walked in the valley of the shadow of death for, 50, 60 years. But at the end, I prefer to think of John's spirit rising in glory with Leon and Martin and, all of the others that have gone on before. And it's important for the people of Selma and the people of Atlanta to be able to say thanks and portray share their respect and admiration for John. But the way I think we have to do that is to do what John did, and that is help to reform this nation and bring out the best in this nation. And he did that in very specific ways: voting rights, a black-Jewish coalition, an active role in the Congress, campaigning for people of goodwill all over the country. And we're going to miss that, and we're going to have to train a new congressperson to represent Atlanta, because Atlanta has a really long tradition going back to President Carter.
In Bloody Sunday in 1965, after the events and the violence, Did you have a clear understanding of its significance and what it would mean ultimately for the civil rights movement in the United States?
I didn't. When I was surprised that they tear gassed us, and I was surprised that they were so brutal in their beating. It was really unnecessary, because these were mostly, you know, a few of us and women and children. I was in the back of the line, so I didn't get anything but a whiff of tear gas. But I was surprised at that, but I wasn't surprised that the nation was awakened. It's one of those divine coincidences that the judgment at Nuremberg was on everybody's television set all over the North. And it was a cold, rainy day, so everybody was at home looking at it. And then after looking at the brutal treatment of Jewish people in Germany and under the rule of Hitler, it cut to Selma. And Americans said then, as they said watching the death of George Floyd, that is not America. I don't want to be a part of that kind of violence and racism. And so it was only the next week or so that Lyndon Johnson was standing up in a joint session of Congress introducing the Voting Rights Act.
Do you remember going to Brown Chapel after the march and seeing the aftermath?
You know, that is one period that I'm terribly foggy about, because I was on the phone in the building next to Brown Chapel trying to keep Dr. King informed of what was going on. He was back here in Atlanta because it was the first Sunday, and he always served communion at his church on the first Sunday. We got the first Sunday and the second Sunday confused. The march was supposed to be on the second Sunday, but it was a leap year. So the 7th of June, of March, ended up being the first Sunday instead of the second Sunday.
Ambassador Young, we're going to take a moment here. We're watching live here, Ambassador Young. We're not sure if you're in front of a television or not, but the horse-drawn carriage is approaching the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We're going to pause now just to take in this moment together.
everybody else.
We are looking live at the horse-drawn carriage singularly going across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the final crossing of that infamous bridge of the congressman, the great, the iconic Congressman John Lewis. There is so much symbolism here in the context of what happened on that bridge more than 50 years ago, where his skull was cracked, so many others injured as Alabama state troopers moved on peaceful protesters trying to cross that bridge. There would ultimately be 3 marches there. But you think about Bloody Sunday, then you think about that same bridge that John Lewis got to walk across again with the first African American president of the United States. And now this. Naima, I know you are there. You are seeing it firsthand, right up close. You talked about the rose petals that are strewn across that bridge. Tell us what's going on in the crowd.
There were different kind of reactions. You could hear the emotions in the crowd. You could hear people saying, "Thank you, John Lewis." You could hear the songs that moved his spirit during the movement. "I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna keep on a walking, Lord, keep on a talking, Lord, marching to the freedom land." And when you really think about all of that, you know, Selma, not a lot may be here in this town, but it is a pivotal town in the history of civil rights. And even though he is crossing that bridge by himself at this very moment, he's not alone. The spirit of those that crowded that bridge, hundreds who crowded that bridge with him, are with him at this very moment. And as his name goes down in the history books, there are so many whose name has never been recognized or honored. And the spirit of all those people are with him at this very moment. Hosea Williams, Joseph E. Laurie, C.T. Vivian, John Wesley Dobbs, every person who contributed to the history of civil rights way before the movement, Alonzo Herndon, even before the movement even took off. All those spirits are with us at this very moment, because the life and legacy of John Lewis represents the eternal gift that his life represented for mankind, for humanity, for making this world and leaving this world a better place than he found it. There's a moment of silence. A lot of people are not saying much at this very moment. They're taking it in. What could you possibly say at this very moment? People are really soaking in this emotional moment, Brenda. Jeff?
All right, Naima, thank you. Ambassador Young, are you still on the line with us?
Yeah, I am.
What are your thoughts as you see this? The passage of time, the passage of John Lewis, such an important part of your life.
What I'm really thinking about is that Selma is still the same. Selma has not changed very much. And it hasn't changed because there has not been the capacity to attract economic development. And I talked to the mayor of Selma last year, and I promised him that we would try to find a way to send some of the development that we're attracting here in Atlanta, that we would try to do something with the Black Belt of Alabama. And I'm still trying to live up to that through my foundation. But maybe now, after this, people will realize that we can't let Selma die. You heard the people last night at the worship. It's probably that river that's the Alabama River, and the Tennessee Tom-Bigby River is about 100 miles, 50 miles, 70 miles, to the west. And in between there is some of the most valuable land in the world. And I've been looking for the possibility of trying to, as people start leaving New York and California and the crowded cities of the north, we don't need them all in Atlanta. And I was trying to figure out how we could build a new town, a new city. Mercedes is building one over near Tuscaloosa, and with the 3 Mercedes plants that moved over there instead of staying in Georgia. but I think that near Selma, there's a tremendous potential for jobs, economic development, and new styles of agriculture, farming aquaponically instead of in the dirt. And those are the things we're looking at in my foundation, and it's because we're still not giving up on Selma.
Ambassador Young, do you believe that John Lewis's name should be on that bridge as opposed to Edmund Pettus?
Well, he said he didn't care. I think it should be there, though. And I think but it's more than the name on a bridge. We've got to do something in terms of major economic development and investment, because the black lives of the Black Belt of Alabama still matter. And we have been through several, we went through a period in the 70s when we were in the catfish farming business with them, and that got undercut by Asia. But it also got undercut by the age of the people who were running the farms. And I don't want to forget the bridges that brought us over. So it's what we do with that bridge. It's got to be more than a name.
And Ambassador Young, we are almost over right now. We're going to listen in and just take in these live photos as they are nearing the end of Congressman John Lewis crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Yeah, right here.
Where is Watkins? Congressman John Lewis crosses the Edmund Pettus Bridge one more time. This time he's not bloody, he's not down, but he's free.
We are waiting now here at the completion of the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the Armed Forces body bearers now to take the casket to put in the hearse as it will depart for the Alabama State Capitol, where Congressman Lewis will lie and repose there. This is the second day of 6 days of a ceremony to honor the life and legacy of Congressman John Lewis. It will culminate here in Atlanta with his funeral service at Ebenezer Baptist Church on Thursday. It was such a peaceful crossing today, which was so beautiful to see that casket go across the bridge alone, peaceful. Congressman Lewis at rest now after so many decades of being a true warrior in the fight for freedom and justice and equality, and all of the chaos and violence that happened on that bridge so many decades ago now washed away.
As I listen to you speak and I see these pictures right now, I'm touched by the American flag wrapping his casket. A country that he loved and that he fought so hard with his own spirit, his blood, his energy, his intellect to try and change for the better.
Well, you know, with this country is at an inflection point right now, as sort of history sort of repeating itself, and we have to decide amongst ourselves as a country what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be the kind of country that John Lewis fought for, or do we want to be the kind of country that John Lewis fought against? It's something to think about as we go forward, and we have to think now, who picks up the mantle? Where do we go from here? Who are the leaders? Is it a leaderless movement? I do see John Lewis as the original leader of the original Black Lives Movement, if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
Before it was a hashtag. And here we are, again, demonstrating in the streets to raise awareness that Black lives matter. Where do we go from here, and who picks up the mantle? Because it's clear we are not there yet. We have a long ways yet to go.
And I think it's so interesting, Brenda. I'm not sure if you guys could hear it, but as the casket reached the end of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, you could hear the crowd singing softly, "We shall overcome." That is always such a very touching song.
It applies.
That the words still ring true.
Yes.
We are still trying to overcome, still a long ways to go. As that casket passed, you could see the historic brown sign to the right of the screen that was instructing directions to the left, the Selma Voting Rights Memorial to the left. So still so many memories there in Selma, but still such a long ways to go. My first story here at 11 Alive last year was with the former APS superintendent, Dr. Maria Carstarfin, who is from Selma, Alabama, just talking about, you know, how the city still, like Ambassador Young said, still so far to go in a place that cannot be forgotten after the national media leaves and after these crowds leave. And I think it's so important to put the spotlight back on Selma and let it pierce your heart and your ears, the fact that Ambassador Young said not much has changed. So who is going to be the change in Selma? Who's going to come in from bigger cities with resources to really start to advance this movement so that Bloody Sunday is not in vain? So that it's not in vain. We have some service information that we do want to get you guys updated about if you want to continue to follow. So on Monday, Congressman Lewis's body was going to be transported to Washington, D.C., where he's going to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol. And then on Wednesday, Congressman Lewis is going to return to his adopted hometown right here in Atlanta. He will then lie in state at the state capitol before a private celebration of life on Thursday at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he was also a member. And we know that it's going to be a huge day in the city of Atlanta. And what I love most about being a newcomer to this city is that he got to be recognized while he was here. These murals and memorials, they're not coming up after he's gone. He got to see them for himself. And it's something to leave behind for future generations to be able to really, really take in and know that he got to see it as well. So I really, really love that it's history, it's walking history.
Yeah, John Lewis knew that we loved him.
Yeah.
He had to know that he was loved and revered by all, especially those who came to know him. And because of his long life and his length of and depth of work, there were many, many, many people who got to know him up close and personal because he allowed that to happen. I want to say as we begin to wrap up here that, you know, Martin Luther King said that freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. And it's so true. For all of the progress that John Lewis helped to cement into the American culture, for all of the change that he was able to accomplish as a leader, influencer, and change maker. As we know right now, in the year 2020, such a tumultuous year, there is still lots of gaps, lots of work to be done, lots of people who are still not free, lots of people who still are not treated with justice and equality. This is a new generation, and in every generation, that has to be won and earned on its own. Who will pick up the mantle? Jeff?
And certainly as I see John Lewis today being taken across the bridge, from a personal standpoint, Aisha and Brenda, you and I have known him for decades here in Atlanta. From a personal, selfish standpoint, you think about him here in Atlanta, who was always, and I know it's a cliche, a man of the people, but I think about seeing him in Kroger at the Ansley Mall here at about 10 o'clock at night. There must have been 50 or 60 people in there, you know, tagging along as though he were the Pied Piper of Hamelin.
And he would, I'm sure he stopped and would take pictures with whoever
That's exactly
asked.
right.
Yeah.
Every hand got shook. You know, he's just trying to buy groceries. Everybody wanted a picture. Everybody wanted to talk to him. He had patience. He had time for everyone. I think about hosting charity events with him in the 1980s. We were guest co-auctioneers. And when he came into 11 Alive about a year ago, he goes, you know, what was that event that you and I did that nobody paid us any attention at all? I said, yeah, downtown. You remember that? And we both laughed. Or running into him in Garden Hills in 2012. I was with my son, and he's yelling at me, comes over, puts his arm around my son for a picture that 50 years from today, that picture with my son will be on his wall in his house with his children and grandchildren.
Oh, what a treasure.
And it is a treasure. And, you know, or being with John Lewis at the White House with the Braves in 1996, and we're out on the front porticos, and he goes, you know, I love the Braves. I just wish they weren't all Republicans. You know, he always had this great sense of humor that always made us laugh and just made us grateful for him as a man, for as a leader, and he just made our city better.
On every level,
yeah.
he was
Yeah.
extraordinary. You know? On the very human level, and then, you know, he's like a saint. Certainly not God, but he was like a saint because he wasn't like the rest of us.
No, he was, and for that matter, guys, he is forever irreplaceable. Yeah. Not only for what he did for America, but just in knowing him, having the honor of knowing him.
Yeah, and some of the really interesting pictures that have circulated on social media, that things that you just never knew that he did, when you guys talk about how touchable he was. One of my favorite photos is the one of him dressing up as his younger self, the outfit that he wore on
Yes.
Sunday.
Yeah, that one.
Yes,
Yeah.
with the backpack.
Yeah, he's, you know, he has the backpack and he has the khaki, you know, trench coat on, and he is just marching a group of children through Comic-Con.
Well, you know, he did like drama.
I loved it. It was
He did like
awesome.
drama.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah, this is me. These photos that you see, this is me. Backpack, trench coat on, you know, probably in his 70s at that point.
I still had the apple and the orange and the toothbrush, toothpaste,
and
a book
toothbrush
in
and
there.
toothpaste. Yeah, he said he knew he was going to be hungry. Apple and orange was the go-to.
Right.
So touchable and so many great memories. And Jeff, like you said, the photos with the younger generation, those will be cherished for years and years to come. And there's so many photos because he never turned anyone down.
The unforgettable John Lewis in life and now in death. For the next 6 days, we will have continuing coverage of the celebration of his life from Selma to Troy, Alabama to Washington, D.C. and back to Atlanta later in the week. We'll have complete coverage on 11 Alive and 11alive.com. For my colleagues, Aisha Howard and Brenda Wood, we thank you for watching, and we thank you for remembering and thinking about the great John Lewis. Have a great Sunday, everybody.
Of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.